Hi, my name is Jocelyn Neal, and this video is about part writing for the AP Music Theory exam. Specifically, I'm going to talk today about tonic expansions, which are 3-chord patterns that are extremely common in tonal music and which we can study to become more fluent at part writing, both from Roman numerals and figured bass. Now, before you watch this video, please click on the link below it and download the worksheet that we will be using today so that you can work along with me. When we talk about tonic expansions, these 3-chord patterns are specifically a way of prolonging a function of tonic through a phrase. We're moving from a tonic chord through an intermediary chord and back to a tonic chord. And the patterns that occur, especially between the soprano and the bass, are formulaic. The more we study this counterpoint between the soprano and the bass, and the more we practice part writing tonic expansions, the more fluent we will be at handling chord progressions. So that's what we're going to practice today. As we work, we're going to pay attention, as always, to our chordal sevenths and our leading tones, making sure that we have stepwise voice leading wherever possible, that we retain common tones, and that the counterpoint adheres to the principles of tonal music. So let's begin. We're going to start by working on a simple tonic expansion, which is a tonic triad, dominant triad, and a tonic triad. Our first example here takes place in the key of G major. Because all I have are 3 root position triads, I can identify the pitch content of those chords as G, B, D, D, F sharp, A, and ending again with G, B, D. I'm going to choose how to voice the first chord. In this case, I will place the chord in closed position with a G in the soprano, a D in the alto, and a B in the tenor. And for my soprano counterpoint, I'm going to use an ascending scale, 1, 2, 3. I see those notes, G, A, and B, available in the pitch content of each chord that I've written with letter names above the staff. Now I have to figure out how to part write an alto and tenor to support that outer voice counterpoint of 1, 2, 3 in the soprano with 1, 5, 1 in the bass. I'm going to move my alto up to the leading tone F sharp, and I'm going to allow that F sharp to then resolve up towards a G in my third chord. I'm going to place my tenor on D, scale degree 5 in the second chord, and I can keep that as a common tone in my third chord. As I'm studying my tonic expansions, I'm going to list the Roman numerals of this particular progression, 1, 5, 1. And I'm going to specifically list the scale degrees of my bass, 1, 5, 1, and the scale degrees of my soprano, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to collect that information so that I can see what the most common patterns are. Let's move to our second example. This is in the key of F major. I notice that my second and third chords have figures under them. Those figures are 6. 6 is a shorthand figured bass notation indicating a third and a sixth above the bass. So I can identify the first chord's pitch content as F, A, C. My second chord's pitch content is E, G, B flat. And my third chord's pitch content is a third above the bass A, which is a C. A sixth above the bass A, which is an F, and the A that's already present in the bass. I'm going to choose to voice my first chord with scale degree 5, C in the soprano. I'll place an A in the alto and I'll double the C in the tenor. This is a perfectly acceptable doubling of the chordal fifth. I'm going to use contrary motion between my soprano and my bass. So as my bass steps up to G, I'm going to move my soprano down to a B flat. I'll move my alto down from A to G, and I'll allow my tenor to move up to the leading tone E. I'm going to continue the downward motion in my soprano, bringing my soprano to an A. I'm doubling the A in this chord. That is perfectly acceptable. I've moved my alto to an F, and because my leading tone was in an inner voice, I can bring it down to scale degree 5. My Roman numerals are 1, 7 diminished 6, 1, 6. And I'm labeling my bass scale degrees 1, 2, 3 against my soprano scale degrees 5, 4, 3. My next example is in the key of E flat major. I'm listing the pitch contents of my chords above the staff. My first chord is E flat, G, B flat. My second chord has an A flat in the bass and figures of 4, 2, which are shorthand for 6, 4, 2. I need a second above the bass, which is B flat. I need a fourth above the bass, which is D. And I need a sixth above the bass, which is F. Plus I have an A flat present. I circle that because it's my chordal seventh and I need to make sure I resolve it properly. My third chord has a sixth in the bass. That's short for 6, 3. I need a third above the bass and a sixth above the bass. That third above the bass is a B flat. That sixth above the bass is an E flat, and I have a G present. Now I can choose to voice my first chord. I'm going to choose to place scale degree 1 in the soprano, and I've got a G in the alto and a B flat in the tenor. I'm going to move my soprano down to the leading tone. That's contrary motion with the bass. I'm going to step my alto down to an F, and I'm going to keep my common tone tenor B flat. Now my chordal seventh is already in the bass, so it already resolves down exactly as it should. My leading tone is in an outer voice in the soprano, which means I must resolve it upward. And my alto on an F can step down to an E flat. I'm going to label my Roman numerals. It's 1, 5, 4, 2, 1, 6. I'm going to label my bass scale degrees 1, 4, 3 and my soprano scale degrees 1, 7, 1. My next example is in the key of D major, and my bass is D, C sharp, D. I notice there is a figure underneath the C sharp. My first chord is a tonic triad, D, F sharp, A. My second chord has 6, 5 under it. That stands for 6, 5, 3. I need a third above the bass, which is E. I need a fifth above the bass, which is G. And I need a sixth above the bass, which is A, plus the bass note C sharp. My last chord is D, F sharp, A. I part write that first chord with scale degree 5 and A in the soprano. I'm going to keep that common tone A as I move into my dominant seventh chord. I'm going to allow my tenor to step up, and G is the chordal seventh. I'll keep track of that. And my alto will move up to an E. As I resolve that chord, I take the chordal seventh down from G to F sharp. I keep my common tone A in the soprano, and I move my alto down to D. My Roman numerals here are 1, 5, 6, 5, 1. My bass scale degrees are 1, 7, 1, and my soprano scale degrees are the common tone 5, 5, 5. It's not a very interesting soprano, but it is very smooth voice leading. Now, before we move on to the rest of our part writing exercises, I'm going to collect the information we have right now about soprano bass counterpoint. So what I'm going to do is list in a new space the 3-note soprano melodies and the 3-note bass note melodies that went with each of these chord progressions. So the first example we did used 1, 2, 3 in the soprano and 1, 5, 1 in the bass. The next example we used had a 5, 4, 3 scale degree soprano line, and the bass scale degrees were 1, 2, 3. And I'm listing the Roman numerals that went with that, 1, 7, 6, 1, 6. The third example we did used a lower neighbor pattern in my soprano melody of 1, 7, 1. My bass used scale degrees 1, 4, 3, and the chord progression was 1, 5, 4, 2, 1, 6. The fourth example we did had that common tone soprano of 5, 5, 5. It used that lower neighbor pattern 1, 7, 1 in the bass, and the chord progression that went with that was 1, 5, 6, 5, 1. What I'm noticing here is that there are very common 3-note melodies that occur in soprano bass counterpoint in these tonic expansions. So let's continue looking at some minor key progressions, and we'll keep that information in mind as we work. I'm in the key of E minor. I have a tonic chord, E, G, B. My second chord has a 6 underneath the bass note. I know that stands for 6-3 in my figured bass. So I need a third above the bass, which is E. I need a sixth above the bass, which is A, and I also have present the bass note, which is C. My third chord has a 6 under it. That means 6-3 above the bass. So I need a third above the bass, which is B, a sixth above the bass, which is E, and the bass note G. I'm going to part rate that first chord, placing scale degree 3, G in the soprano, an E in the alto, and a B in the tenor. As I move to my next chord, I'm going to let my soprano step up to A. I'm going to keep my common tone E in the alto, and I'll move my tenor down to A. As I move to my third chord, I'll continue the ascending scale with the soprano moving to B, keep my common tone E in the alto, and move my tenor down to G. One thing to notice here is the very nice voice exchange between the soprano, G-A-B, and the tenor, B-A-G. I'm going to label the chord progression here. The chord progression is a tonic chord moving through a 4-6 chord to a 1-6 chord. This chord progression, 1-4-6, 1-6, is a really important tonic expansion, but it's one of the few that does not use a dominant function chord as its second chord. So it's a little bit different than the others. There's no leading tone in that second chord. It's still a very useful progression that many composers use and one that is important to study. I'm going to label my bass scale degrees 1, 6, 3, and those typically are used in this progression with the soprano melody 3, 4, 5. My next example is in the key of D minor. I start with the tonic triad, D, F, A. My next chord has figured bass of 6, 4, 3, and there's a slash through the sixth, which indicates that that pitch is raised. A third above the bass is G, a fourth above the bass is A, and a raised sixth above the bass is C sharp. Add my bass note E to that list, and I have a dominant seventh chord in second inversion. I circle the G, which is the chordal seventh, to keep track of it. My last note is an F with figured bass under it of 6, which indicates 6-3, and the notes of that chord are D, F, A. As I part rate that chord, I'm going to choose to place scale degree 3, an F in the soprano, D in the alto, and A in the tenor. I'm going to move that soprano up to G, which is the chordal seventh. I circled that pitch in my letter names to keep track of it, and I'm placing the leading tone C sharp in the alto. It's a C sharp because of the slash in the figured bass. I'll let my tenor sit on the common tone A. As I move to my third chord, I'm going to keep that common tone A in the tenor. My chordal seventh G resolves down, my leading tone resolves up. I'm going to label my soprano melody, which is scale degrees 3, 4, 3. My bass melody is 1, 2, 3. I notice the doubling of the third in that last chord, and that's perfectly acceptable, and I label my Roman numerals. My next example is in the key of C minor. I start with a C minor triad, C, E flat, G. My next chord has figured bass of 6, 5 under it, which I know is shorthand for 6, 5, 3. So above the B in the bass, I have a D, I have an F, and I have a G. My third chord is simply a tonic triad, C, E flat, G. I'm going to choose to part write my first chord with a C in the soprano, scale degree 1. I'll place an E flat in the alto and a G in the tenor. In these tonic expansions that have a dominant chord in the middle, I can usually keep a common tone scale degree 5 in some voice, and that's a really good technique for smooth voice leading. In this case, my tenor is going to hold that common tone G all the way through my progression. I'm going to allow my alto to catch the chordal seventh, which is an F, and resolve it down, and I'll use a soprano of 1, 2, 3 against my bass of scale degrees 1, 7, 1. My final example here is in the key of B minor. I start with a B triad, B, D, F sharp. My next chord has a figure bass indication of sharp 4 and 2. I know that that also is shorthand for 6, 4, 2. So I need a second above the bass, and I need a raised fourth above the bass, and I need a sixth above the bass. Now, there are many different ways to notate figured bass. When you have a raised fourth above the bass, you will most commonly see a sharp before the number 4 in your figured bass. But one notation that you will occasionally encounter is a 4 that has a little plus sign after that. It means the same thing. The pitch content in that case is going to be F sharp, that's the second above the bass. A sharp, that's a raised fourth above the bass. C sharp, that's a sixth above the bass, and then the bass note E. It's a seventh chord. I'll circle the chordal seventh, which is the pitch E. And finally, it moves to a chord that has the pitch content B, D, F sharp. Let's part write this first chord, placing scale degree 3 in the soprano. I have a soprano on D, an alto on F sharp, and a tenor on F sharp as well. I've doubled the fifth of this chord. It's a perfectly fine option. I'm going to move my soprano down to C sharp. I'm going to keep my common tone. I love those common tones. I'm going to keep that common tone scale degree 5 in my alto and move my tenor up to an A sharp. As I move to my final chord, my soprano will step down to B, keep my common tone in the alto. That common tone scale degree 5 is a great linear technique, and raise my leading tone in the tenor up to B. I will label my chord progression 1, 5, 4, 2, 1, 6. My bass scale degrees 1, 4, 3, and my soprano scale degrees 3, 2, 1. Now it's time to collect all of the soprano and bass counterpoint that we used in these examples, just like we did with our first 4 examples. I'll just take a new piece of paper here to do that. The first example that we wrote used a soprano of 3, 4, 5 against a bass of 1, 6, 3. That's a different kind of tonic expansion because it uses a 4 chord, a plagal harmony in the middle of that tonic expansion. My next example used a soprano of 3, 4, 3 against a bass of 1, 2, 3. And that chord progression was 1, 5, 4, 3, 1, 6. My next example used a soprano of 1, 2, 3 over a bass of 1, 7, 1. And a chord progression of 1, 5, 6, 5, 1. And my final example used a soprano of 3, 2, 1 against a bass of 1, 4, 3. Notice that nice voice exchange. The soprano's moving from 3 down to 1 while the bass is moving from 1 up to 3. And that chord progression was 1, 5, 4, 2, 1, 6. Now there's one progression on this page which is a little bit unique, and I'd like us to go back and part write it a different way. This is the progression in D minor that you see as the second example on the bottom line. Let's just take a fresh piece of paper and look at that chord progression again. Notice in particular that the bass is moving up scale degrees 1, 2, 3. That's going to be important. Our first chord has the pitch content of DFA. Our second chord had the pitch content of A, C sharp, E, G. Circle the G because it's the chordal seventh. And our third chord had the pitch content of D, F, A. Now this particular chord progression, which is 1, 5, 4, 3, 1, 6, has a very unique potential. Composers use this chord progression with a soprano melody of scale degrees 3, 4, 5. In this case, those pitches are F, G, A. And you'll notice that the chordal seventh, which I'm marking in blue here, does something it is almost never allowed to do. That chordal seventh, which is the pitch G, is moving up. Well, let's finish our chord progression and we'll talk about why that's allowed in this case only. I'm going to place my tenor on the common tone pitch A and keep that all the way through. And I'm going to place my alto on D, move it down to a C sharp leading tone, and then move it back up to D. This progression, where the bass is moving 1, 2, 3, and the soprano is moving 3, 4, 5, is a special exception to the rule of taking your chordal seventh and resolving it down. And this special exception is granted because of the counterpoint between the soprano and the bass. They're moving in parallel tenths. Parallel tenths are a good thing in counterpoint. We like to have these parallel tenths, and they're very musically compelling. So when you have this chord progression and your soprano is walking up 3, 4, 5, and your bass is moving up 1, 2, 3 in parallel tenths, this is the only instance where you are allowed to resolve that chordal seventh upward. Okay, so that's a study of tonic expansions. Please review those soprano bass counterpoint pairs that we compiled in the blank space on our page. Practice your part writing, and thanks for watching.